First of all, thank you everybody for joining for our panel today to discuss supporting child survivors of sexual abuse. My name is Hanna. I work for Verity as the Intervention Department Manager. Dara, I'll pass over to you.
And my name is Dara Chanin, and I am a CPS social work supervisor with the county, but I also, my primary role is running Redwood Children's Center, which is our child advocacy center.
Hi, my name is Leni. I work for Verity as a bilingual sexual assault advocate. I am stationed at the Family Justice Center.
I also work for Verity. I am the crisis line coordinator and team lead, and I'm kind of stationed at both locations of Family Justice Center and our main office.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We'll be kind of going through and asking some questions about how best to support survivors and their families. And before we get started into the questions we have written today, Dara, would you mind just giving us a brief rundown of what Redwood Children's Center does and kind of what that, main roles of the forensic interview are?
Great, thank you. Redwood Children's Center, and you'll hear us referring to it as RCC, that's the acronym that most of us use. We are a child advocacy center, and some of you are probably saying, what is a child advocacy center? But there are over 900 centers across the nation, and the reason that those centers were established were in order to provide one central location for children who are victims of abuse and neglect to come where the whole multidisciplinary team is in one place. And so the idea is that the services all come together for the child at this one location. And that way the child can tell their story one time, and all of the professionals needing to hear that information are there at the center, as well as providing the child with all the services that they need and support right there in one location.
Perfect, thank you. And one of the reasons that we have Leni and Jess joining us today on this panel specifically is that both of them work as, or have worked in the past as advocates who provide services and support to the clients and their families while they're going through this process. So I think we can go ahead and get started for our first question. And I'm going to open up to anyone who would like to answer. We can all, go around and expand as well. What is the appropriate way to react if a child discloses sexual abuse to you? Thank you.
I think it's really important, also really hard, but I think it's important to try to stay calm. Hearing that a child has been abused is really hard, and I think it's natural to have an intense reaction, whether it's one of anger, guilt, anxiety, fear, upset in general. I think that it makes it harder for a child to disclose if the person reacts in like a really intense way. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that, but I can also say more.
You can jump in. I think it's really important to believe them, and just the way like you express yourself, like the way you're listening to them. They need to know that reassurance that you believe them, because it's really hard for anyone to come forward, even more a child. So just knowing that, okay, I finally told someone and they're going to believe me, they're going to help me. And that's what we're here to do. We're here to help them and their family.
Yeah, and with that, those are both awesome answers to that question. And just to add to that is not to ask the child a lot of questions. It's better not to ask any questions and just listen. There is information on our website as well as in our brochure that are very specific about what you can say or not to say to a child when they disclose abuse to you.
And also, just to add something else that I thought of, I think it's really important to not ask questions that like infer blame. So like, well, did you try to stop them? Or why didn't you do this and this? Or having those kinds of questions come up. Like people might have them, but it's not good to ask the child that, because it does infer blame. And it's hard enough to come forward with something like that. In general, the child is maybe fearful, anxious, nervous, ashamed. So, and also I think that what we see a lot is that the abuser might be someone that the child loves or cares for, has in the past. And so also, even though it's hard, like if the child discloses to someone that has a relationship to the abuser as well, not having like a really strong reaction about that. And yeah, and also just like filling in the story, asking questions that are, you know, putting words in the child's mouth, just letting the child talk, and whatever they're comfortable with, that's what they share.
Thank you all. I think those are wonderful tips and advice for if this does, you know, come up. I think oftentimes one of the reasons advocacy is so vital is that hopefully we've never been through this process before, but once it happens, it can be really difficult to navigate. And so, you know, in that, keeping that in mind, after a disclosure is made, what would the process be of, you know, for those in Sonoma County getting linked up and going to Redwood Children's Center, or, you know, in general, child advocacy? How do you get a forensic interview started?
I will say the way I see it, it goes on two ways. Either it goes through law enforcement or it goes through CPS. So regardless, either way, there has to be a report made either to, again, law enforcement or CPS. And that's why it's so important for all of us who are mandated reporters. You know, if we hear anything, we see anything, go ahead and report it. And they will get in contact with RCC and get everything going, get everyone that needs to get involved together to support the family.
Jess.
Right. Perfect answer.
Perfect. So yeah, what would we say? This might be a little more involved on your end, Dara, because at Verity, we tend to stay out of this process and really are there more supporting the family while the interview is going on. But what is involved in the forensic interview process? Would you mind walking us through a little bit of what that looks like?
Sure. Well, to start off with, our forensic interviewers all have to go through specialized training. It's a 4 or 5 day training, depending on where they're getting it from, that is an approved training in a 10-step forensic interviewing process protocol. They do get certified. And then after that training, they also go through an additional, it's usually anywhere from 3 to 6 months of training with ongoing supervision for usually up to the first 2 years while they're still doing forensic interviewing. So it is quite a lengthy training process. Our forensic interviewers also happen to be social workers. Most of them are licensed in some way, whether it be LCSW, which means a licensed clinical social worker, or marriage family therapist. So they also have an additional training. But the forensic interview process is really about gathering facts in a way that is developmentally appropriate for the child. So making sure that we're not asking questions that developmentally they cannot answer, and asking them in a way that is forensically defensible. And there's a lot of research that is behind all of this. So that training up front is just one part of it. But the ongoing training is really crucial in making sure that we are continually asking questions and following the evidence that is current, because as we know, evidence can change from time to time. Most importantly is that we don't further traumatize a child, so that the child can say they want to stop at any time. They're not forced to answer any questions. It's really at their pace. It's all about the child and making sure that they feel comfortable and that they're not going to have to talk about anything that they don't want to talk about.
One of the things that I've always found so cool and really, I think, trauma informed is that when when interview is going to take place, taking the client, the child through and showing them the setup of, this is where we'll be talking to you. This is the interview, and they will have an earpiece in, and showing them the whole process so that there's no questions and it's so transparent. And I always just thought that was so cool and a really important part of the work that y'all do.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we definitely don't want a child to feel like we're keeping secrets from them. So we make it a point to show them everything. And if they have any questions, and just make sure that they are walking into it knowing everything that is happening, both in front of them and even behind the curtain, so to say.
Thank you. So for everyone, I mean, I'm sure, Dara, again, this is especially focusing on your end for the forensic interviewing, but I think Leni and Jess, we probably can answer as well. Why is recording the forensic interview so important in the process?
I'm interested to hear from your guys' perspective, because ours comes from such a little bit more of a legal framework. And so I'm really interested to hear what you guys have to say.
Okay. So the way I see it is it's recorded. So if anyone that's part of a team that needs to be involved with the case can see it. So law enforcement, the social worker, they're all getting the same answers without asking the client. So that's like the whole point of is, only one person is talking to the client and getting all the answers that the team as a whole need. And I know sometimes, as much as we would like for it to be only one interview, sometimes, it's a lot for the client. So they might have to come back another day.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole point of it is not to be repeating the same questions and getting the same answers from the child.
Yeah.
Leni, I don't know if you want to add.
No, that was super perfect. I have nothing to add to that.
I know.
I really started thinking about this a lot recently when I was watching actually the Alan Farrow documentary series that was on HBO, which is kind of an examination into the allegations against Woody Allen that came up I believe in the 90s and have been kind of brought to light with the Me Too movement. And, the victim in that case, the survivor, straight up was talking as an adult now and saying, I was asked, I think she was interviewed maybe 20 times by law enforcement, by district attorneys. She was asked by her mom who was filming it because she didn't know what the correct steps were and who's prepared for this to happen again. But one of the things that was happening is if she said anything that deviated from her former statements, they were using that as evidence that she was making it up perhaps. And if she said something that actually sounded too correct to her former statements, they were saying, well, look, she's been coached. So it was really this like not win kind of situation. And that kind of helped click for me too. Wow, this is such a more trauma-informed approach to really try and minimize the re-traumatization of having to tell your story over and over. And also to, have everything you say picked apart again and again. So Dara, I don't know if there was anything you wanted to add from the more forensic technical side, but I do think that that's a really big part of the, remaining client focused and trauma informed for the children.
Yeah, definitely. I think Jessica said it really well. Yes, the other kind of more forensic and legal aspects to it are one, that if a detective is present watching the interview and it's recorded, then possibly at the arraignment hearing, the victim would not have to go testify in court. And of course, we always want to support that, the ability that a child or youth does not have to go into court. Also, to present to a jury. So there are times when victims/survivors do not have to go in and testify, and the forensic interviewer can be used in a courtroom rather than having a youth go to and testify. As well as a forensic interviewer can also testify as to why maybe at times when a victim or survivor is brought into the courtroom that their information on the stand may be different than the information that's recorded on the forensic interviewer on the recording. And so often the forensic interviewer can explain in research why that is the case.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, so the final question we have prepared here today is, why is it so important to teach children the correct names for their body parts? If we have any thoughts on that.
I think it's important for many reasons. But I would imagine that one of them being that it makes it easier for the child to talk about, like in the interview, like this is the body part that this happened with, or this is where I was touched or whatever. I've heard a lot of parents use like, kind of like silly names for body parts and some stuff that I was like, whoa, like how did you come up with that? But it's good to tell kids what the body parts are called, shame-free, just using body part names and the accurate terms. And I think it's good to introduce that language early on, from like birth to whenever. Those conversations should be had and can be had with ease and really like shame-free. And also just sharing information about the diversity of all bodies and abilities. Kids need to know that stuff. And like modeling positive body awareness to the best of the person's ability. And yeah, like talking about puberty and body image, like all of that I think is really important and valuable for kids to have, like from birth until whenever.
Thank you.
I think to add on to that, it's also important for them to know, because it'll help out the case, you know, if in general, let's say, I'm thinking of specifically the cases we have in Spanish, you know, where like there's like nicknames for body parts, whereas like they say a nickname, and you know, if I'm not aware of that nickname, and they're pretty much telling me, hey, someone touched my whatever they call it, I'm not aware that that's a private part, you know, I'm not going to know that that child is being touched. And it goes this, it wouldn't necessarily only be for the cases for like Spanish speaking families. It would be the same for like all around, you know, if you give your private, if you teach your children nicknames instead of real names, it'll be hard. Like if we don't know if it's their butt, you know, or their vagina, if they just call it my bottom, like, okay, your bottom where, like here or there. So sorry, I kind of just went everywhere with that, but yeah, I think it's really important for them to know their body parts.
I totally agree, Jess, especially I'm thinking in circumstances like a child who's at school, you know, making a comment to a teacher, and if they have a nickname. I think there's some nicknames that are more typically used. Like if someone says like my Lala or my hoo-ha, like that's actually really common, I think, across the board. And so you might hear that and say like, oh, but then there's also nicknames that are so unique to that family that a teacher really might not know that that's a private part they're touching about what, or talking about being touched, whether it's maybe another child had touched them that way and they're saying they felt uncomfortable, or they're saying something happened outside of the, you know, school realm and at their home or at their doctor's office. And if there isn't that knowledge kind of universally of what they're referring to, it could definitely be missed when it's being, you know, disclosed. So I think what you said was absolutely spot on. So, Dara, did you have anything you wanted to add to that one?
I think you all said it so beautifully. And I think one other area, but it's kind of touched on, is about prevention. And so that with the discussion, like Leni and Jessica said, about naming, having parents talk about their body parts in a non-shaming way, also opens the door for that communication so that a child can understand what's okay, what's not okay, and then be able to communicate what's happening to them if they do choose to disclose.
Absolutely. I completely agree. You know, these were all of our questions we had listed, but is there anything else that before we close, anyone would like to add or touch on? Anything in that realm?
Yes.
Great.
Something that I just wanted to add that I meant to say, I think with the first question, but I missed it.
So the first question being, what is the appropriate way to react if a child discloses?
Going back to that, I think it's important to avoid some things like confronting the alleged abuser, because that can really make things worse and unsafe for a child and potentially damage the investigation. So that's crucial. And also, you know, making promises to the child about like, oh, like I promise I won't tell anyone if you tell me, stuff like that. And then just pressuring the child for information. I think it's I would imagine that, you know, the parent would have, or whoever is close to, like, would have questions like, well, what exactly happened and the details of everything. But I think that not pressuring the child for the details beyond what they want to say is something to definitely bear in mind. And is there anything else I wanted to add? Nope, I think that was it.
No, thank you. I really appreciate that. And to expand on what you said a little bit about not making promises that you would not tell what they disclose, I actually think I've seen it modeled a few times by different people working in the field, and I really loved this approach. And I'm not yet a parent, but I hope that I bring this into parenting in the future if I ever am, which is being really clear with children that they're actually, adults should not be having secrets with kids. And I think that even if you're just saying like, oh, like you can tell me private things, but it doesn't mean that we're going to have a secret, because I think that can really normalize the idea of like, oh, it's okay. This is just a secret that you and I have. And so if it's normal in the family to say like, oh, this is a secret, you told me this, is that something that maybe could normalize that with another adult who says, yeah, this is just don't tell your family about. So I think it's those things to be aware of in our own language of what we're bringing to the table as like is a sort of typical child adult relationship. And I think that it's really wise to kind of be clear that there are things that we can't keep secret, but we have the right to our own privacy. So I liked that you touched on that, Leni, and I agree.
Yeah, and then one more thing that came to mind is like when a child does disclose, I think that it's wise for whoever they disclose to take notes, because a lot of the time like they're disclosing and like it's the person can become overwhelmed, and like I'm not saying like stop the child and be like, let me go get like a pen and paper, but like right after, like try to write that down. I think that it can be really helpful. And yeah, just like respect that the child may only want to share parts of what happened and not all, and just not like inflicting any like blame and shame.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for your time. It was great to get to have this conversation and get some more insight on, the role at Redwood Children's Center, and, hopefully be able to provide some insight as well to those who are interested on what to do if this, situation does come up. Dara, you mentioned a website that has some more tips and information. Is that active and live? And if so, how can we find it?
Yes, it's supposed to be. So www.rccsonomacounty.org. And if they accidentally do .com, they're probably going to find the same place, or .net. So it's just RCC, lowercase, and Sonoma County.
Okay, great. And also, Redwood Children's Center is located within the Family Justice Center in Sonoma County. So they have a great amount of information online as well, and some great services if needed. Thank you everyone so much.
Thank you.